The debt that exists in the world today cannot be repaid. The world is broke. That's a kind of a simple way to think about it. Where how that plays out will take years, but that's a good place to start in terms of understanding it. Where did this come from? Well, runaway deficit spending. I'm not talking about the last 2 years, the last 10 years. This has really been building over 50 years. By the way, I don't think of this as a recession or a past recession or even a panic, although clearly there was a panic in 2008. To me, the best way to understand it is to understand that we're in a depression. If you go back to the Great Depression, 1934 was one of the best years in the stock market ever prior to 2010. So there's 2009 and 2010. So there's nothing inconsistent about declining unemployment, rising stock markets, rising commodity prices in the middle of a depression. And that's just kind of my frame for understanding it. So we have baseline deficit spending. We have enormous additional fiscal stimulus. By the way, the best science is that stimulus is one of the great misnomers. I don't call it stimulus, I just call it spending. Stimulus does not stimulate anything. And there's been an enormous amount of work on the so-called Keynesian multiplier, which now looks to be a fraction, maybe somewhere between 0.6 and 0.8 at best, and sometimes as low as 0. And the theory there was if you spend $1 trillion, you get 1.5 trillion of added GDP. Bearing in mind, to spend $1 trillion, you've got to take it from the private sector because there's no place else to get it, which means that stimulus spending destroys wealth, which is feels a lot more intuitively correct. So you take $1 from the private sector, you run it through the government, it's kind of intuitive that you're going to get less at the other end. It doesn't mean zero, but the idea that that process destroys wealth makes good intuitive sense, and the science seems to bear that out. So we're not getting anything for a stimulus. And then finally, we've had a massive, massive substitution of public debt for private debt. So let's use Ireland as a kind of a petri dish. So the Irish banks go broke, right? They go broke because they were dopes. So the Irish government bails them out. So suddenly the banks are still standing, but now the Irish government has taken on the debt. Well, now the Irish government's broke. So who's bailing them out? Well, they're being bailed out by a consortium of the European Central Bank. They have a special stabilization fund, and the IMF. All right, so Irish government lifts the bank debt. IMF lifts the Irish government debt. Who supports the IMF? The United States. I mean, there are other countries, but the United States is a big backer of the IMF. All this comes back to the Fed at the end of the day. The Fed is just like the earth source of all the, I won't call it wealth, but I will call it currency in the world. And this has been going on all over the place, from AIG and Bear Stearns, and you know all the names. I don't need to go through them. But my point is, all we did is by bailing out the private system, we didn't solve a problem. We didn't write off the debt. We didn't make it go away. All we did was move it from one bucket to another, from a private bucket to a government bucket. So this has exacerbated the sovereign debt crisis that I described. So this is kind of where we are. Now, how do you get out of it? How do you repay the debt? Well, the traditional way was you would grow the economy and impose a certain level of taxes, and through an expanding pie and collecting taxes, you'd sort of defease the debt. But we've crossed the threshold. We've crossed the tipping point. We can't do that anymore. There's no combination of growth and taxes that can defease or pay off the size of the liability. Because our economy is not growing, we're kind of doing 2%, which is not even enough to create enough jobs for all the people entering the workforce, let alone reduce the 8 million unemployed. Apart from that, if you dial up taxes, and again, I'm not trying to make a policy argument pro or anti any of these things. To me, this is beyond ideology. It's beyond politics. This is just math. My point is, if you dial up the taxes, whatever you think of that, you're going to depress the growth. And so this first slide is just these show countries, and these debt levels are as a percentage of GDP. So, for example, let's take the United States. That's about 300% of GDP. Our GDP is 14 trillion approximately, so 3 times that. We have 42 trillion in debt. This is public-private business debt combined. Why do that? Well, the thing is, you have to look at the private sector debt. You have to look at individual debt. If I owe a lot of money and I have to pay it back, well, in the course of paying it back, I'm not spending it, am I? And so it's that deleveraging, it's that paying off the debt that from the individual up to the government level, except the government's not, that is depressing spending. So you can't, with the deleveraging, you don't get the consumption. Without the consumption, you don't get the growth, you don't get the taxes. You just cannot get there from here. By the way, that 42 trillion, 3 times 14, is grossly understated, because that's only like debt where you actually borrowed it and signed a note and issued some liability. If you throw on contingent liabilities, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, student loans, FHA, Federal Home Loan Bank System, I could keep going, but you get the point.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information. And it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
I have bad news for you. If you're not rich by now, you're screwed. And if you're in debt, you're even double screwed. How so, you might wonder? Well, the sad truth is that you're working your whole life to make someone else rich. The mega corporations, the banks, the politicians, everyone is getting richer. They get your money. And what is even worse, they get your time, they get your life. You are not even in a rat race, you're in a financial prison. But what could a solution for you look like? Honestly, I don't know, but I know what a solution for me would look like. It's very simple. I use whatever money I have and I multiply it with 1,000. This could make my life much easier and probably yours as well. If you have $1,000 available and multiply this with 1,000, I believe that this could solve some financial issue for the one or the other. Of course, if you're ugly, you would have to multiply it with much more than 1,000. My name is Markus Dahn, and this is what I decided to do. I decided to 1000x my money. This is not a joke. I know what you may be thinking. What is this guy talking about? How should this work? This is not possible. Well, I made a detailed video where I laid out my plan. And some clever folks might even want to look at this plan and copy it and do exactly what I do. This is just a little hint on the side. You have two options. You leave, you forget what you have seen. You do whatever you're doing and you hope that somehow you get some other results. Good luck with that. Or you click the link below the video. You enter your email address because I'm not showing this to everybody. You at least watch my video on how I plan to 1000x my money. The choice is yours. Make the right choice. Join me. See what a different future you could have. See at least how I intend, how I plan to do the 1000x. So click on the link below, enter your email address, and I see you on the other side. Your Markus Dahn.